Hi, this is attorney Paul DeLaury with the Sudden Wealth Podcast, where we talk about how families and business owners can protect their assets and empower their children to be responsible stewards of their wealth. And the co-host is Mike Zalno. Hey there, Michael.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for joining us today on the podcast. Today, we're talking to an academically trained philosopher who inherited money and gave it all away. And by the way, he also has written a book that I have here, and it's very interesting. Maybe you can talk about that in just a little bit. But about a month ago, I bumped into Jeremy Sherman on the internet, and he describes himself as a science researcher and writer on the origins of life, human nature, and total jerks. He's the author again of this book, Neither Ghost Nor Machine, The Emergence of Nature and Selves. And I have a feeling this conversation is going to be really interesting. So lean forward and listen carefully.
It's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Oh, very, very good.
Nice to see you.
So, yeah. Hi, Jeremy. Hi, Michael.
Hi, all.
So, yeah, Jeremy, I picked up a copy of your book. And first of all, I have to say that it's unusual in that you actually try to get to the truth of, well, the truth of something through actually applying logic and analytical thinking.
That's a great title for a book, The Truth of Something. I like that.
Well, I mean, because it's so easy to put out a book nowadays, and they're, basically, I mean, the easy way is you ghostwrite something or you dictate something while you're on the toilet, and then you have someone transcribe it and turn it into a book, and it's nothing more than a bunch of like just random thoughts. And I might be overstating my case there, but what I do mean is that your book is actually extremely analytical. I can tell that you're academically trained, and so for anyone who actually wants to like
to know the truth of something.
Yeah, of something. Well, okay, for a layperson.
Yes, simply put, it's a book on a question that's often evaded by scientists. What's trying and how did it start? Computers don't try, inanimate things don't try, organisms try, and they tried, the very first organism tried. That's called the struggle for existence. And people these days tend to assume that Darwin explained it. No, he didn't. You need the struggle for existence for evolution to happen. So what is trying and how did it start? And I should clarify a couple things. First of all, I didn't give it all away. I gave it all away, but there was more to come. So I live off my inheritance. You don't make money in this line of work. I mean, I spent 3 years writing that book at least, and I probably have made 1,500 on it. And my dad was actually, at one point I asked my dad, why did he give us money? And he said, because the important work in the world doesn't pay well. He says, money goes to people who money flows through. That is, anybody who's in the supply chain, supply and demand chain can skim off money. He and my grandfather had founded Midas Mufflers. So that's where the money came from. But he said that to me shortly before he died. He died at 59. And I think that ended up being my guiding principle. But yes, at the age of 20, I did give away all the money I had. And then and joined a commune and left the commune in part motivated by my grandfather saying, I've got another $1 million aside for Jeremy, but I can't give it to the commune. I can see what, if he ever leaves. And at that time, I have spent most of my life in, you could say, environmental activism, nonprofits, public policy, all of that. That was my first career. And I realized I'd have more leverage with his money off the commune. So I left it and was for a while giving away $250,000 a year. Unlike a lot of people, I was quite obsessed with the inequality and the vocational derailment I got having received money, more money than I could spend at the age 16. So that was my initial response. It was just to balk and say, either I have to prove as important as Martin Luther King to justify this money, or I have to give it away, is how I felt at age 20.
And how do you feel about having done that now?
Um, uh, uh, I've wasted my whole life learning things, learning things I now already know. At one point, my dad did take me aside and say, "You're giving away a lot of it. You don't have that much." And he was right. My smug answer back was, "Well, how much do I have?" And in a way, I did start to pay attention to finances and how to manage it. Um, but uh, but I haven't, I have what Warren Buffett suggests. I have enough that I can do anything, but not enough that I could do nothing. And what's happened to me is I've really ended up deciding that of all the discretionary freedom I've got, what I really want to do is be taking careful notes on reality and us in it, and that's what my work ends up being, and I adore it. And I get to collaborate with top flight academics. I'm really what you'd call a gentleman scholar or a gent scholar. That's where I ended up settled. And but I get to work with hyper rigorous guys who keep me honest and have given me a whole perspective that is reflected in that book. I mean, yeah, whether we're right or not is another question, but at least there's a rigor and care in how we think things through. I'm not just rationalizing a bunch of gut intuitions or revelations that I've had. This is a different kind of work.
So I have a follow-up question.
Please.
How do you maintain your enthusiasm for life, or like why? For lack of a better word, why do you keep trying, or what motivates you to work as hard as it seems like you work when you don't have to work?
So I have relatives who don't have to work and don't work. And for whatever reason, from fairly early on, that creeped me out. I couldn't bear it. I've even noticed subtle aversions to or disdain for relatives who do that, and then realized, no, that's just me projecting. I would break out in a rash if I lived that life. It's scary to me. I have to keep working. And oddly, the commune, we associate communes with free love and all sorts of things like this. This was not that kind of commune. It was truly a boot camp for me. So I'd come out of a fairly cushy life, Jewish liberal life. I went to UC Santa Cruz at a time when you could get 5 units of university credit for keeping a dream journal. I mean, it was a silly time. And so I go off to this commune where the rule was if someone asked you to do something, you just do it. And I was doing manual labor for 5 years in rural Tennessee. It was the world's largest hippie commune. It was 1,400 members. I was completely celibate for the first 3 years. You weren't allowed to have sex unless you were engaged to be married. They called us the Technicolor Amish. We were extremely strict about our tribal ways. We smoked a lot of pot. We didn't drink any alcohol, but we were hardworking. You worked just all day long. And to do that during your formative years, the teen years, to really be pressed to see what your outer limits are, I think is fabulous. And anyway, one way or another, I just couldn't. I get creeped out. My research colleague, a Harvard Berkeley neuroscientist, says the self-employed have an idiot for a boss. And so knowing that, I have cultivated an inner whip. That is nothing. I am not obligated to produce anything, but I employ a kind of strategic gullibility to keep myself working. By that, I mean, I assume that there's pressure on me to produce that there isn't. But that's okay. That's my strategic gullibility. I'm trying to convince myself, and it's quite successful. But on top of that, my work is a blast. I cannot distinguish between work and play. I actually do this work play 7 days a week. I mean, I'm because it's just too much fun. I'm having a great time. So, and that's the luck. It's two lucks. It's one is the freedom to keep on, and this is something an inheritance can provide, the freedom to try out things longer than most people get to, and then to luck into a bottomless inbox. So my happiness comes from having work for which I have infinite patience. And that's the luck of being this kind of inheritor.
My comment would be that, we think of work, having to work, but from what it sounds like, is that you're not working. You're having a lot of fun and enjoying the intellectual challenges, etc., of doing something you really like. Most people that work are not necessarily doing what they like.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so people who retire end up with a lot of free space, and some have trouble. I have an entire lifetime. I never worried about paying bills, even on the commune. But I have an entire life of looking around for what really motivates me to work on, and then succumbing to it. And actually, I would say that happened at around the age 40. Around age 40, I remembered what Buckminster Fuller said, which was, what were you about to do before they told you you had to go out and make a living? And up until then, even though, like I said, there was a vocational derailment for me, getting the money at 16 and no longer feeling the pressure to earn a living, I somehow interpreted my inheritance as a huge burden to do some kind of work and not other kinds of work. And only at around 37, around 37, a midlife crisis actually, did I get around to, what am I good for? Set aside what I should do for my status. What am I particularly adept at doing? Where could I best use myself? Because using myself is being useful with what I've got. Doing the most with what I'm dealt turns out to be the greatest source of satisfaction for me. And it took me until, I'm 65 now, it took me till about 5 years to realize that I didn't need status. You need status if status is how you're going to put money on the put food on the table. But if you've got money, you actually don't need status. You can have what my dad called the courage of your insignificance. And so at that point, I even stopped worrying about status. I mean, I like it when I've got audience, but my audience is limited. My stuff is a little unfamiliar, is what I would say. It's not especially difficult. It's just unfamiliar to a lot of people. But I've got a fan base. I've got my 15 people of fame. So enough to keep me going, and I don't have to worry about status as much. I get to be a mouth that actually academics don't. A gent scholar can, I generated an article yesterday, an idea for an article yesterday, published it as a blog article, have already hundreds of responses to it. I get a kind of feedback academics don't. They'll work a year and a half on an article that gets read by 20 people. That's the state of things in academics right now.
Well, I like how you answered a question that I have.
I hope I did.
In a way without using the word. So I think an unspoken question that a lot of people have is, what's my purpose? Why am I here? And you never said the word purpose anywhere in anything that you said, but you answered the question. How can you use your experience for the best of the world, or to? Yeah.
Well, actually, it's actually quite interesting this way. Everybody's obsessed with themselves and their purposes, what they should try to do. Well, it turned out my purpose was to understand scientifically what purpose is. The technical name for it is teleology. It's end-directed work, means to ends work. Well, so I ended up stumbling into the company of a guy who had just begun. He had just finished writing a masterful book on the origins of language in humans. He was a Harvard neuroscientist at the time, and he had turned his attention to explaining purpose. That's what trying is about. You're trying to do things because you have an aim, a goal, an end. So it turned out that my purpose was to try and roll up my sleeves and figure out what purpose is from its origins in chemistry, because chemistry itself is purposeless. Okay. That's where
So I want to point out something though, and this seems to always happen when people start talking about purpose. So you decided what your purpose was. It's not a God-given universe, whatever thing.
I play with the irony of my God-given purpose that I made up for myself.
Right.
No, and in fact, I don't think there's a meaning of life. I think life is full of meaning. One of the ways one of my research colleagues says it is that purpose is real, but has no original or ultimate purpose. That is, I assume that purpose emerges from chemistry in this neck of the woods about 10 billion years after the universe started. And that purpose is real. It really does change things that happen. So in that sense, it exists. But I've spent all this time explaining what purpose is. That includes, the whole suite of things we associate with life, and you can never talk about in physics and chemistry: purpose, aims, goals, trying, motivation, appetite. All of that is purpose language. And you can't bring it up in physics. If a physics professor said the moon pulls on the tides because it's trying to achieve something, we'd think he was nuts. But a biologist and a social scientist has to talk that way. So what is purpose and how does it start becomes the question. No, I didn't know. There is no, I happen to be an atheist, but in this line of work, you would be an atheist. You're assuming that there was no purpose, no original purpose, that there's nothing guiding you, because you have to explain, and therefore the burden is on the sciences to explain how it comes out.
Right. Otherwise, you get into a circular.
Right. That's right.
reasoning.
Yeah. Or worse. A lot of my work these days is in a field I call psychoproctology, and it's people playing God or God's emissary. That is, and they think you can do this secularly. It doesn't matter what you claim, but basically you're playing the humble authority on everything in this world. And you can do this for communism. You can do it for what? Yeah, it doesn't matter what you're doing it for. That's all just window dressing. But this business of assuming you've got a bead on what reality wants of you, and that you're just the humble servant of it while you go around arrogantly telling everybody how to live, that's a focus in psychoproctology.
I use the term BS, but that's
right. And you
Yeah.
know that the philosophers have written about the difference between BS and lying.
Yes.
You have seen that difference.
Yes.
It's an
Yes.
important difference.
It is an important difference.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I
Harry
think a lot
Frankfurt.
of people have no idea about that.
No,
Yeah.
that's right. Nor do they need to. If you can oscillate between the two fluidly.
I guess.
But
it
actually,
makes, like,
sorry, I want to make one connection from between inheritance and BS. I'm fascinated by the strategies by which people cope with inheritances. After all, it was a big burden in my life. But I happened to grow up in a time when we were paying a lot of attention to inequality, in a time and a culture. My dad was sort of a leader in that movement. While he was the president of Midas Mufflers, he was hanging out with the Chicago Seven, Saul Alinsky, Jesse Jackson, and Ralph Nader. They were dinner guests at the house. So I was acutely aware of inequality. Now, what they say about fascism is that fascism generally starts with the haves coming up with a rationalization for why they are the haves. And they are often that it's preordained that I was fated to be the person who has this stuff. I'm entitled to it. I deserve it at some cosmological level. I think that's really dangerous. And there are other coping strategies, including just the simplistic one, which says, I have it, and it's mine, and the world's unfair, and so I enjoy it. That can work for some people. It wouldn't have worked for me. I was an anxious bunny growing up, and very anxious about inequality.
So, Jeremy, if people want to find out more about you, where can they go?
Yeah, they can find way too much of me, but all in accessible form at my website, jeremysherman.com. It's not fully built out, but the media page is, and I'm in all the mediums. So I've got 3 podcasts going. One of them being this one on psychoproctology, one being debates between me and myself, and Jeremy Sherman PhD and Jeremy Sherman GED, having it out, and one of them being a term of the day kind of a thing called "To Name It Is to Tame It," terms for reading between the lines with greater comprehension. But I have YouTube videos on psychoproctology. I've got YouTube videos on this origins of life research. And if you just look up Jeremy Sherman online, again, you'll find way too much of me. And
Perfect.
Facebook friend me too. I'm very accessible.
Very good. And we'll have a good. We'll have a link in our show notes also. And so this actually leads me to a question of the week, which
Good.
is, I don't know, what is your purpose? Or as Jeremy says, what is your God-given purpose that you've decided?
That you made up. So that's your question for the listeners, right?
That's the question for the listener. Yeah.
Excellent.
And yeah. And so we'll have a link in the show notes where you can go and respond to that. So that does it for this episode of the Sudden Wealth Podcast. And I guess that's it. Very good. Thank you so much for being on, Jeremy.
It was a pleasure to be with you. Take care, and we'll talk again, perhaps.
I hope so.
All right.